Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Arbiter of Worlds. Here at the channel, we fight to bring good advice to the Game Master. It's an uphill battle because Game Masters get given a lot of bad advice. One of the worst pieces of advice that Game Masters get is to focus on having a great story arc. Stories, of course, are as old as mankind, but not every story is part of a story arc. A story arc is a meta-story that links individual storylines together. Consider the early Greek myths of Perseus slaying the Medusa and Bellerophon slaying the Chimera. Each has a storyline, but there's no link between the two. In contrast, consider the myths of Paris wooing Helen of Troy, Achilles slaying Hector, and Odysseus encountering Circe. These are all linked by the Trojan War story arc. Or for a more recent example, contrast the adventures of Robert E. Howard's Conan, which had short stories without a story arc, with Tolkien's Frodo, who had adventures within a larger story arc. Now, the earliest role-playing games were similar to those early Greek myths or the Conan short stories. The party of adventurers would go down to the dungeon, they'd knock down some doors, they'd kill some orcs, and they'd go home. And in next week's adventure, they'd knock down some thicker doors, kill some ogres, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that type of play if that's what you enjoy. But some gamers wanted something more than episodic play. And that's what the story arc is supposed to do. It's supposed to give that something more. Now, the first published RPG products that actually linked adventures across space and time were actually Gary Gygax's GDQ series of modules, Against the Giants, leading to Vault of the Drow, culminating in Queen of the Demon Web Pits. But the big breakthrough came when TSR gave us the Dragonlance series, which featured a story arc that was over a dozen modules long. To players in the mid-80s, story arcs seemed revolutionary. They added highly detailed backgrounds, flavorful depth, a sense of purpose to what had previously been only loosely connected modules. And those are all wonderful things. They are things that any good game master should strive to have in his games. But there was a hidden cost to the story arc. A hidden cost that was very steep. And it was a cost in player agency. You see, a story arc only works if the narrator can create a plot, which is to say, a sequence of events that affect changes on the situation of the protagonists. When the narrator is a game master, then the players are his protagonists, and he's made a commitment to effecting change on their situation. And the players are now the objects rather than the subjects of a story. The story arc transforms adventurers and players into actors and audience. And for this reason, all campaigns that use a story arc end up with what I call directed storytelling. The game master becomes like a movie director, directing the sequence of events that will occur with an eye towards achieving particular outcomes or expressing particular themes, and he is all about focusing on what happens next in his story. Now, there is another way to add story to your RPGs, and it's called emergent storytelling. Emergent storytelling focuses on what just happened. Emergent story is the memoirs of your fictional characters. It's the history of their fictional deeds. A directed story GM is going to be concerned about whether or not what the players are doing is moving things in the direction he desires. An emergent story GM is concerned with whether or not the players are succeeding in moving things in the direction the players desire. Now, emergent story is great, but it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. You can't simply release your players into the game world and expect entertainment to ensue. Well, I mean, you can, and entertainment might ensue, but the sort of entertainment that will ensue will be very short-term and involve inns, bar brawls, or orcs. Emergent story, to work, needs its own version of the story arc, but it's one that's catered to emergent play and doesn't come at a cost of agency. The technique I recommend to allow emergent storytelling is something I call a story web. The story web approach that I take is location-based rather than event-based. It begins with a map of the region within which the campaign will launch, which is often called the sandbox, and then it develops a few dozen points of interest within it. Now, a point of interest is simply a location in your game world that's going to be interesting to your adventurers. Different GMs use different methods to create their points of interest, right? You can use a mix of free-form creativity, adaptation or borrowing of other published material, rolls on random encounter charts, other techniques. But a good point of interest just needs to be a paragraph or two in length when you're setting up your campaign. Here's an example of a point of interest from my official campaign setting, the Borderlands of the Ard Empire. Point of interest 21, Shrine of the White Lady. Hidden in a secluded forest clearing is an ivory-covered shrine of white marble sacred to Damara, the White Lady, built by the elves when they ruled southern Argyle. The shrine is guarded by a unicorn who protects it from monsters of the Viespin forest. Within the shrine is a pool of crystal clear water. The waters of the pool carry a powerful magic. Any lawful character who drinks from them is relieved of one side effect from tampering with mortality. In exchange for this boon, the character receives a quest to destroy chaotic creatures in southern Argyle. The pool's waters work but once in a character's lifetime. Okay, so that's a point of interest. Point of interest could also be a dungeon, it could be a lair, it could be a piece of interesting terrain. Whatever it is, you just describe it in a brief paragraph. And then once you've come up with about 24 or so points of interest, you go back and you look for possible links between them. Proximity, shared history, things like that. And the idea is that since the story is going to emerge from the characters encountering interesting stuff, the story web should help them move from one point of interest to another. So let's add the following to the Shrine of the White Lady. The ceiling of the shrine carries a mosaic map of the Borderlands as it stood before the Argolian War, and it shows the location of point of interest number 10, Sipharon, point of interest number 16, Collapsed Elven Keep, point of interest number 25, Ruined City of Sifendir, point of interest number 45, Watchtower at Amon Moor. So now the Shrine of the White Lady has a ceiling mosaic that shows the path to these 4 other points of interest that are all historically linked to the fallen Elven Kingdom. Now, of course, having a mosaic is just one way of linking up the story web. There's tons of ways players could uncover links between locations in your sandbox. They could find treasure maps in hordes that lead to another point of interest. They could rescue captives that hail from another place. They could translate hieroglyphic carvings on a wall that mention another point of interest. They could read NPC journals about other locations. They could talk to NPCs who've traveled between the 2 locations, and on and on. What contrasts the story web from the story arc is that it offers multiple layers of choice. The first layer of choice is that at any point the party has multiple threads of the web to pursue. Do they want to see where the treasure map leads? Or do they want to visit the elven ruins they learned about? The second layer of choice is the ability for the party to ignore the web entirely. Since the points of interest exist independently as locations in the game world, the party can go explore as it would like. In short, the story web is a road network to a range of destinations that allows off-road travel. It is not a railroad track leading down one way. Again, a road network to a range of destinations, but it also allows off-road travel. Within a story web, you can't be sure that your players will encounter number 1 before number 2, or number 2 before number 10, nor can you be sure they'll encounter any particular location or character or monster at all. You've established a setting, and then the story that occurs within that setting is the result of player choice. They get to enjoy an emergent story as they move along the strands of your story web. And they may enjoy burning your story web to the ground, as the case may be. And at a certain point in the course of running your campaign, you're going to hate that. You're going to begin to feel the urge to transform the emergent story into a directed story. You might find yourself saying, "The Lost Temple of Arneson is so cool, I really want them to go there." And so then you have the local king come down with bubonic Ebola, which can only be cured if the polyhedral of power can be recovered from the Lost Temple. Now, there's nothing wrong with this per se. And in my own game, I offer random charts to create background events, and one of them really can inflict a plague on the population. But to stay true to player agency, to stay true to emergent storytelling, we need to be willing to let the players say, "Nah, I'd rather go check out the Tower of Gygax. Pass the king our best wishes for his recovery." And then you need to run with what the players want to do. Maybe that means the king dies and the land goes into upheaval. Maybe it means that another adventuring party recovers the polyhedral and the PCs suddenly have rivals for their fame in the land. Maybe it means that the king declares them outlaws and they have to join forces with the monsters. Again, the point is that the story isn't something you decide alone. The story emerges from what the players decide, because it's not your story, it's their story. And that's the difference between a directed storytelling campaign with a story arc and an emergent storytelling campaign with a story web. That's all for this week. If anyone needs me, I will be here putting the J in INTJ. See you soon.